Alrighty, we are live.
All right. Hi, I'd like to All right. Is everybody ready? Great. So I would like to, I'd like to welcome everybody to this event. Thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to come and be with us and ask questions. This is the 2020 Youth Voter Town Hall for Missouri State Democratic candidates. So I'd first like to let all of the candidates briefly introduce themselves. So first off, we have Lindsey Simmons. She's the Democratic candidate for Congressional District 4, and she's running against Republican incumbent Vicky Hartzler. Lindsey, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Sure. My name is Lindsey Simmons, as Autumn said, and I'm running in the 4th Congressional District of Missouri, which stretches from the southern suburbs of Kansas City all the way over here to Columbia. It goes as far north as Moberly, goes down to the Lake of the Ozarks and Fort Leonard Wood, and then heads west back to the Kansas line. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I think that this event is such an awesome opportunity for us as candidates to connect with younger voters, and major props to Autumn for being really the ringleader to help bring this together. So I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. I am just excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Judy Baker. She's the Democratic candidate for Missouri State Senate 19, and she's running against the Republican incumbent Caleb Rowden. Judy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Autumn. And I'm just trying to figure out my technology, so thanks for just waiting for me. I'm Judy Baker. I'm running for State Senate, and that is Cooper County and Boone County, the entire counties each. And it's a very exciting race. I'm running against the majority leader, and there's a lot of differences between us, and I am really looking forward to making sure that we get that out there. I'm really glad to be here tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we have Kari Chesney, the Democratic candidate for the Missouri State House District 50, and she's running against the Republican incumbent Sarah Walsh. Kari, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Autumn. So the 50th House District does not unfortunately run on county lines, but I do have a good chunk of southern Boone County as well as northern Montauk County. So if you know where California, Missouri is, that's in my district. And then little slivers of Cole and Cooper County. So Prairie Home over on the west side in Cooper, and then Centertown and Jamestown over on the east side in Cole County. And I'm actually really excited to be able to speak with younger voters this evening as a younger-ish voter myself. I'm only 31, so a lot of the issues that are relevant to the youth vote are going to be very relevant to me. So I'm excited to have this conversation and get to know more about what's important to y'all and have a good conversation tonight. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And finally, we have Justin Aldred, the Democratic candidate for the Southern Boone County Commissioner, running against the Republican incumbent Fred Perry. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Autumn, and thank you for being our host here tonight. My name is Justin Aldred. I'm running for Boone County Southern District Commissioner. I am so happy to speak here tonight, and this is really important to me because where I grew up, college didn't really look like an option. The economic opportunities weren't there. And that's the same for so many high school students in Missouri and right here in Boone County. So I'm very excited to talk to you all tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I'd like to remind all of our viewers that if they have a question, they can just put it in the YouTube chat and we'll try to get to it. But just to get us going, I'd like to start with school funding, since this is probably one of the most important topics for younger voters as it affects them probably the most directly. So we know that both the state and federal level have been cutting funding to K-12 public education as well as higher education. So this is a question for any of the candidates. As a legislator, how would you combat the cuts and keep our schools funded?
I can go ahead and start. At the state level, we have a serious issue with the way that we fund public education. So it may not have come across your news feed, but just recently in the last couple of months, the governor has cut $133 million from K through 12 education and about $41 million from higher education. And this is on top of cuts that had already been made when they readjusted the funding formula at the state level to get rid of things in the formula like school transportation, which who needs that, right? Who needs to get to school? But I look at a budget as a list of the priorities for our state. And it's very obvious that education is not a priority for our governor. It's not a priority for our legislators. And that really, really needs to change. As of right now, we are pretty much focused on local level funding for education, which creates huge gaps in how much funding each of our districts gets. And this just creates massive inequity between districts. It creates massive inequity between kids that grow up in lower income families and higher income families. And it just keeps the divide even more drastic. And so we really need to take a re-examination of school funding at the state level, make sure that we're including things like school transportation, diversity, inclusion. All of those things are vitally important to our school budgets, making sure that we're able to provide for our students, have the highest quality, newest textbooks so that they're getting the best information that they can. And that starts with reprioritizing our budget, making sure that we have the funding for education. We're not, providing $500 million for new prisons and $15 million for tourism during a pandemic, and rather focusing that money on our kids.
I think that Kari is exactly right, and I'm running for federal office. So what I think, kind of from my perspective of government that needs to happen is that we need more federal funding to our state and local governments. COVID-19 has really exacerbated a lack of funding already existent in our educational system. In my district, many public schools are already down to 4 days a week because we can't afford the fifth day to keep schools open. That was pre-COVID. Now that COVID-19 has happened, we know that schools lack the resources to keep kids safe during the public health crisis. There are school districts in our district in Missouri who are passing out waivers asking parents to sign them because they know that the school district cannot keep the students safe and they're afraid of potential lawsuits. And, Kari mentioned that the state has cut over $130 million from education just due to COVID-19. At the same time, the woman who currently represents the 4th District, Vicki Hartzler, voted against and publicly stated that she would not support giving additional funding to state and local governments so that they could help with things like education. And this is a place where state and federal government officials can come together to help local communities. And that's something that's really important to remember, that government can work together, we can function as a team, and that's what we should be doing, and we're not. And the result of that is that our students are getting a worse education, they are less safe when they are in schools, and it's just further exacerbating the inequalities that exist between students who are in school districts that have a lot of funding and those who don't. And that should not be the case in Missouri.
So I'm running for local office. It's a little bit different at my level, but I still think it's incredibly important that our schools are fully funded. That's not something I ever want to see cut. And I think that's something that all of our public officials should take seriously, because I think that K through 12 sets the stage for where, specifically in Boone County, our students go in life. With that said, I think the county commission can encourage affordable colleges and programs to come to Boone County. So for instance, down in Southern Boone County, a recent development, we have Rankin Technical College coming in. Boone County recently approved funds to bring Rankin Tech into Ashland. And that also establishes co-curriculum programs that kind of help our local school system. That allows Southern Boone students to get an associate's degree after 1 year of graduating high school. And they get a bachelor's degree through a 2-year program after high school. So things like that we can do to at least supplement public education.
Judith, is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
Unmute me. Hi. I'm running for state senate, so hopefully we'll have some real opportunity to manage some of the funds better than they have been managed in the past. And a lot of what happens is our legislature has prioritized giving big tax breaks to corporations and billionaires and individuals who have money, individuals who contribute to their campaigns. Seem to do quite well with the funds that are supposed to be going to public education. Public higher education and public K through 12 should be our top priority, because every dollar that's invested in education is a dollar we don't have to spend later on rehabilitation and things like that. So it's been very distressing to me to watch. I was state representative a little over a decade ago, and there's this continual decline over that decade in education funding. And all the research shows that the things that really help kids are supporting teachers, essentially, smaller classrooms and more professional development. And I think that we don't build it all into the formula, what's called the funding formula. Any of the things that really make for quality education in our state. We have, we're in the lower quartiles of, funding for teacher salaries. And, I know that teachers see teaching as a mission, and it's not all about making a lot of money, but at the same time, to attract the best talent to classrooms, we need to be funding our schools better.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to let anybody know who's just joining us, if you have any questions, just leave them in the YouTube chat and we'll try to get to them. So another big issue that faces many young voters is school debt. So, and this is another question for any of the candidates, how can we reduce the burden on our college population while simultaneously retaining our high caliber of colleges and universities here in Missouri?
I can go first again, I guess. So
you just beat me.
Sorry, if you want to go first, go ahead.
It's kind of just, go ahead.
Nope, I'm you.
It's kind of just everything we were just talking about. I mean, it's a little over a decade ago, the state supported our public higher education institutions in a way that only 30% of the tuition was paid by the student and 70% was paid by the state. And that has over the decade and a half that the GOP has been in control, it has flipped. It is now 70% student tuition and 30% state commitment. So it goes back to just like what Kari was saying about priorities. Are we and when we are budgeting, are we saying our kids are our most important asset? And I don't think we are.
as someone who is still in college, so just briefly, my history, I came down to the University of Missouri in 2011 to pursue my degree in vet med, received my doctorate in 2015, and then stuck around for a PhD position, PhD residency position, and I'm just finishing up my PhD now at the university. So I am intimately aware of the issue with school debt and loans and all of the above. I currently look at my school loans that amount to about $170,000 and cry a little inside and then try to forget they exist. But it is like Judy said, is a huge issue for our younger people, for our young families. Imagine what our economy could be if all of those young professionals who are just leaving college, have been out for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, who are still paying a quarter of their paycheck to the government, could stimulate our economy, could buy a house, which we know that young people are not purchasing at any rate similar to what our parents and grandparents bought at. Could buy that new car, could start a family, with some sort of comfort, knowing that they have the means to afford being able to start that family. And so we are putting our young people at a disadvantage very early in life by saddling them with $50, $60, $70, $170,000 in debt that they then need to go back and repay. And it is completely unacceptable. If you look at how important our public universities and colleges are to our state, to innovation, to technology, it is extraordinarily important no matter what area you decide to go into. The University of Missouri has a huge agricultural program. So any farmer in Missouri benefits from the MU Extension program or could benefit from that program. And we now are starting to build the translational and precision medicine building, which is going to accelerate Mizzou into the future of precision medicine, which is up and coming and on the forefront of treatments for human diseases. And you look at all of these things and then you wonder why our state government doesn't care about higher education. Because if you think they don't care about K through 12, they definitely don't care about higher education. It is very, very low on their list. And so we need to, again, reprioritize and make sure that education, no matter what level it is funded to the highest degree.
So I think that access to college level education is an absolute must in the 21st century. I think that everybody here would agree with that. Access to high quality, affordable college level education is something that more and more people need in order to get sustainable jobs. And in some cases, I think just in order to put food on the table. I'll say again, an example of what the county commission can do is things like Rankin Tech, where the county commission helped facilitate funding so that we can get a college campus down here in Ashland. Programs like that can help get affordable education to our rural communities and overall in our county. On the other side of things, COVID-19 specifically has highlighted the need for more effective online and long distance education. And I think that's something that as a community, we need to be prepared for, we need to take seriously, and we need to talk about funding. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm in a pretty similar boat as Kari. I went to college and had to pay for it. Some with loans. Luckily, Missouri has a really awesome Bright Light scholarship that helped me pay my way through school. That was when Missouri still gave a lot of funding to those kind of programs. They have since stopped. I then went to graduate school to get a master's degree, and then I went to Harvard Law School. So I am also sitting on a really nice sum of six-figure debt myself. And I think, it isn't complicated to understand how we got to this place, right? The effective tax rate for corporations in the 1950s and 60s was over 50%. Today, it's in the low 20s. And so what has happened is that higher education was well funded, and then they started giving tax breaks to corporations, and then they couldn't fund the school anymore. And so the federal government was trying to help students, and so they offered student loans, and we took them because for me, it was really the only way that I could get the education that I wanted. And the result of those corporate tax cuts is a significant burdening of our young people. And so we have a choice. We can choose to invest in tax cuts for corporations, or you can choose to invest in the future of young people. That's really the two sides of the coin here. And I think that investing in young people and in students, and even branching out beyond, just thinking about four-year universities, we should be investing in apprenticeship opportunities in technical colleges. We should be looking for partnerships the way that Mizzou does with Moberly Area Community College, and trying to help lower costs that way. There's a lot of different ways we can look at it, but my kid doesn't yet have student loan debt, but he sure has daycare debt, which is a whole other problem. But we have this choice, and it's really between giving money to corporations or giving money to students who are trying to benefit their future. And that's really what it comes down to. It honestly isn't complicated. It's a matter of where your priorities are. And I think, for us, it's very clear that we prioritize people over for-profit companies, or at least that's what we should be doing.
It really is the failure of the trickle-down theory. If you give these big tax breaks to big corporations and or wealthy individuals, the theory is that it'll trickle down into the economy, and it just really never has. And if it doesn't do that and doesn't stimulate the economy from the bottom up, then you end up having sacrificed our schools and our education and our youth for some pipe dream of a trickle-down theory.
And Justin actually brought up a really good point about online education. With COVID, it's been highlighted, but if you think of kind of the trajectory of the job market and how many careers nowadays could be done online, there is a huge opportunity here for us as state and federal legislators to create a fund for actual universal broadband access. I know that's something that was a big sticking point for a lot of districts in Missouri as to how they were going to do virtual teaching, because a lot of districts, a lot of students don't have access to the internet at home. They have to go to the library to get online. And so having that as a part of our education for our young people is incredibly important. And if you think about, like I said, the number of jobs that could be done online, if we were able to bring universal broadband to every area of Missouri, imagine how many kids could go back home after college and do their computer programming job from Southeast Missouri. They wouldn't have to travel to a bigger city or bigger town to actually find a job that is able to pay back their school loans. You could have our rural towns become lively again because they have the infrastructure and the ability to actually thrive in that situation, bring people back to those areas, and boost that economy.
That would take a plan. That would take a plan, Kari, to do that very thing.
It takes legislators like all of us to make a plan.
We could just but get in there and make the plan, because it's almost like digital access, any kind of digital access. There's all kinds of ways that even rural areas get the digital access but don't have the access. If it could be thought of as a utility almost, and just like decades ago when the rural electric cooperatives started, it was because it was so difficult to get electricity out to rural areas. And we're having the same difficulty today. That last mile is very expensive, but there's other alternatives. And if we would just see it as a utility, as an important infrastructure, it would sure just, it's how you think. It's the philosophy that you have. And I'm so excited about us bringing that to the state legislature when we get there.
All right, thank you guys so much for your answers. I'd like to let anybody know who's just joining us now. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat so that we can answer them. So why don't we switch gears a little bit and let's move on to school safety. So there has been many bills shot down at both the state and federal level that would improve the safety of both teachers and students. So again, a question for any of the candidates. What are your plans for school safety if you were to be elected?
I'll start. And it's not easy. Let me just say that right off the bat. This is not an easy question. There's several different streams of policy that could be used in order to, to make some changes in school safety. One of those, of course, is how many guns are in schools, and if we're talking about COVID, how do we make plans for a pandemic? It depends on what safety means. But I think that I would just say one overarching thing, and that is that a lot of safety is local. And, one school system safety needs is going to be different than another area's school safety needs. And I think that we as a state should empower local jurisdictions to make decisions for what they need and then support them wholeheartedly with the resources that they need.
I, for one, very much appreciate that sentiment, running for local office myself. So thank you very much, Judy. I want to say right at the beginning, first and foremost, that students and teachers should not have to choose between education and safety. That's a terribly sad situation. Unfortunately, it's been that way for a while now. I hope working together, we can put all those types of issues behind us once and for all. The county commission doesn't directly have control over those types of bills that would go through the federal or the state legislature, but the commission does oversee the budget for some safety programs, and I'd like to do everything I can to make sure that those programs are fully funded and sustainable.
So I would just say, I agree with Judy. I believe that our state should be supporting what our local officials feel is important in terms of school safety. But what I will say is there is information out there. We have it for, in particular, our college campuses on what type of things they want in terms of safety. So time and time again, it has been brought up in the state legislature that there should be concealed carry on college campuses in the state of Missouri. As a student body, students answer a set of survey questions every single year about all manner of things, from mental health to things like concealed carry to, their quality of life on campus, what have you. And every single year it comes out that the majority of students are very opposed to concealed carry on campus. Now, if you're actually acting as a representative, like our legislators should, you should be representing the constituents of that area. And if the constituents of that area say no, you should not continue to force a bill down their throats. Our college kids have said they do not want this. And so in the interest of the constituency, we should stop spending time trying to pass it. And I look at a lot of safety similar to that. There are so many groups out there that have come out and spoken out about how teachers should not be armed. I mean, if you think about the number of hours that our police officers and security officers go through training in order to respond in a crisis situation, there's no way that our teachers would be able to have a fraction of that kind of training. And so that puts a lot of people at risk when you introduce firearms into that situation with people that are not specifically trained for crisis situations. So there's a lot of data out there we can use. There's a lot of, majority opinions out there that we can use to try to figure out what the best way to keep, our teachers and staff and students safe. And we just need to start actually looking at the data to see what is going to work and what's not.
I agree with really what everyone has said here. I think that we have to always take into account what is happening on the ground. Every school district is different. What people say locally should have kind of the greatest weight of significance placed on it. With that said, the concept of safety in school at this point, and I think we're really seeing this with COVID-19, is far reaching. What we have seen over the past few months is that schools aren't just places you send your kids to learn. They aren't just places that we go to learn. They serve as daycares. They serve as counseling centers. They serve as mental health centers. They serve as behavioral health centers. A school provides such tremendous community service that, we need safety in terms of infrastructure upgrades for our schools. Out here, you can get hit with a tornado pretty quick. And when we have bridges that don't, function because they still haven't been repaired from past floods, you have a huge problem with just transportation to school. We have issues with sexual assault on campus. And that is a scope of safety that we need to talk about for our young people. And I think that so often when we think about schools being safe, we are talking about guns and on-campus shootings and things of that nature. But by and large, the number one and number two most frequent reasons that people are not safe on campus isn't necessarily related to firearms. There are a number of other reasons that students find themselves in unsafe situations on campus. And the, kind of solution to all of these issues is what we talked about earlier. It's funding. If you fund schools, then you can provide safer spaces, safer from firearm violence, but also safer from COVID-19, safer sexual abuse. All of these things really come down to funding. And again, it's a priority issue. It's not just priority in terms of educating young people, but priority in terms of keeping them safe in a very much so holistic kind of a way. And again, coming from the federal perspective, I really believe that it comes down to just funding local and state governments and then allowing local and state governments to do what's best for their community.
All right, thank you so much for your guys' comments. Again, if anybody's just joining us, if you have a question, you can leave it in the chat and we'll get it answered. So again, switching gears, another topic that's important to many younger voters is the environment. So climate change is said to be the single biggest existential threat to mankind, and we only have a short time to change our behaviors before it's too late. So do any of you have any specific environmental policies that you'd like to focus on while you're in office? And if so, how well will these benefit climate change? This is a question for any of the candidates.
I believe that we as a community have a responsibility to do all that we can to leave Boone County a better place for our children and for the future in general. Like you said, climate change is an existential threat to our way of life, to our ecosystem, to our agricultural community. Whether that be in the city of Columbia or whether that be in Boone County. I don't think that Boone County can necessarily wait for others to take the lead. I think that counties across the nation have taken concrete steps to reduce carbon emissions, to invest in renewable resources, and we need to do the same here in Missouri. The City of Columbia's Climate Action Plan is a great example for us to follow. As a commissioner, I want to fight on the front lines for a county government's right to institute local control. And that would allow the county to implement environmental protections, specifically for the right for local governments to stand up to CAFOs, combined animal feeding operations, that threaten our water table, destroy our air, destroy our land. Another priority for me is the Hinkson Creek watershed. In the past, there was an agreement between the Environmental Protection Agency, Missouri DNR, Boone County, the City of Columbia, the University of Missouri, and I think that's one of the biggest in the nation, or one of the first times in the nation that all 5 of those from top down got together. They partnered up in an effort to restore the Hinkson Creek area. That was under the previous Democratic Commissioner, Karen Miller. They worked to make that partnership. Unfortunately, my opponent, who was elected in 2016, failed to make that a priority, but I'd like to see that come back as a priority for the county commission.
So climate change is something that matters a great deal to me. I'm running against a woman who less than a year ago said that when God destroys the earth, he won't do it with slow melting ice caps. That is something that she actually tweeted out. She then went on to say that evolution is not real. So we are in a place where we have elected officials who just legitimately do not believe in science. I took every environmental law class that I could when I was going to law school. I grew up on a farm. I wanted to study the intersection between agriculture and environment because my family's farm suffered greatly in the flood of '93. Everything was underwater. I woke up and I thought my family moved me down to the Lake of the Ozarks, but no, it was just the back 40 that was completely gone. And I saved up my allowance and paid 5 cents a page to print off at my local library my very first IPCC report. And I was shocked when I was reading in this report that if we increased our temperature another 2 degrees Celsius at that time, that climate change at that point would be irreversible. And what I can tell you is that in many ways, we are already too late. What we need to do now is invest in adaptation policy and mitigation policy. That's where we are. That's just the truth of where we are. The positive side of that, though, is that in a market where there's supply and demand, where there is a real demand for tools for mitigation and tools for adaptation, tools for farming sustainability, tools for green energy, renewable energy resources, there can be someone's going to have to create that supply and someone can benefit from that market. And I think that we should do that here in the 4th district where we have the resources to actually do that. That brings money into our communities. It helps our environment and it enables us to fund all of these great things that we've been talking about during this conversation. This is something where by solving one problem, we have the ability to solve many problems. And so I would just say that what we need to do is really invest in these mitigation and adaptation solutions. One just piece that I am personally very bothered by is that the Trump administration has been rolling back environmental regulations over and over and over again. We all know this. One that doesn't get a lot of attention because it's not as sexy as the other ones is from the National Environmental Policy Act. This is an act that mandates that any federal agency at all, anytime it does a program that has the potential to interfere with the environment, they have to write an environmental impact statement. It has to be written. The Supreme Court has upheld it. What the Trump administration did is they took out a line and made it clear that no longer do those statements have to include climate change. They made it clear that those environmental impact statements only have to pertain to immediate effects, not to cumulative effects. Basically writing out the concern of climate change in any environmental impact statement that our federal agencies would come up with. They're trying to erase that climate change is even a problem. That is a very concrete thing that we have to fix. if we're going to touch on anything else. And I'll stop my ranting there.
So in a lot of places where I have been in, a room with folks that don't ascribe to climate change and don't think that it's a real thing, they're always using the economic or financial reason to not buy in, because they say it's just too expensive. It's too expensive to change over to more carbon-friendly modalities, right? What I constantly point out to them is they don't take into account the cost of not doing it. I mean, fires in California, floods in the Midwest, hurricanes in the Gulf. I mean, at what point do you start racking up the cost of doing nothing? So I think that we need to put that on the balance sheet. It's kind of like what Lindsey was saying, let's do impact studies to figure out, and they're knowable numbers, and the numbers are out there about what it costs for us to not do climate mitigation. When I was a state representative, I had about 7 or so actual environmental bills, and several of them passed after I left, and they were all different from all different angles. One of them was my most important one, probably, was I asked the state government to invest in making all of the state buildings more efficient, more energy efficient. The number one biggest contributor to climate change and to carbon footprint is our buildings, believe it or not. I know we think it's our cars and our CAFOs, and those are big. But the carbon footprint of buildings is huge. So I would like to continue my work on mitigating energy leakage in buildings, doing more LEED certification, rewarding people who see this as a real problem and have answers for it.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something very similar to what Judy said, that, we always hear about the price tag for what it will cost for us to, convert over to quote unquote green energy, but, we never hear the cost of, what it'll cost if we don't. And it's very similar to healthcare, it's like prevention always costs less than what happens when you actually get sick. So at this point, our environment is sick, and it's going to cost a lot to fix it. But at the state level, we are just continuing to do things that directly go against trying to solve some of the impacts we have on our environment. So I know Justin mentioned CAFOs. So at the state level, they passed a law that essentially took away local control of agriculture from our counties and local municipalities. It essentially says that the state regulations for agriculture are universal for Missouri, and we have almost no regulation on agriculture in the state. It was a bill that was lobbied heavily by big corporations, international corporations, so that they could come in and they could build big factory farms on very small pieces of land. And what we know from data from Iowa, it pollutes the water, it pollutes the air, it destroys the land, it decreases property values for the people that live around there, and it artificially reduces prices for other farmers, smaller farmers in the area, because they can't compete anymore. It's a huge, huge problem. And so one of my biggest environmental policies when I get into office will be agricultural policy, trying to make sure that we have good, sound agricultural policy that will put a check on massive factory farms while still allowing our, smaller family farms that have been there for decades to go about their day. Because at the end of it all, those are the folks that know if they take care of their water, they take care of the land, they're going to have a better yield. They're going to have, healthier animals. And so they care about how their, what their environmental impact is. But in addition, there's a lot of things that we can do at the local level. So I sat as vice chair of the City of Columbia and Boone County Joint Energy and Environment Commission during the time in which the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan was being implemented, or written, sorry, and was a big part of analyzing that and revising it, making sure that it had everything in it that we would want. And one of the things that we really pushed for that we don't currently do, even in what we consider to be very progressive city of Columbia, we do not abide by international building codes if it is recommended in the building codes. And so we do all the musts. We do everything in there. Musts are 100% required, but recommendations are not. And most of the energy efficiency things in building codes are recommended. We're trying to get it so that the city would make those requirements for new buildings and renovations and things like that. And just making sure, at the local level, those things are adhered to would go a long way in terms of helping environmental standards, updating our buildings so that we reduce our carbon footprint, and so much more.
Thank you so much for your guys' answers. So we have a question coming in from YouTube from Carly Jo Johnston. This is a question for any of the candidates. What are your plans to address police brutality? Defund, reform, abolish, etc.
So I feel that the defund the police slogan is very, very misleading to what a lot of folks are trying to say when it comes to what they truly want out of these scenarios. So essentially what I foresee that as is we need to have a plethora of different first responders available for different scenarios. Right now, we do a disservice to our police officers by forcing them to take care of basically anything and everything that might come up in the community. So they have to take care of mental health issues. They have to take care of addiction issues. They have to take care of homelessness. That is, their job is keeping the peace. And it is a vitally, vitally important part of our community. And we need to keep that. But we need to make sure that they have the resources to do that part of their job and do that part well. And that means that we need resources like mental health professionals, addiction specialists, people that can help with low income housing and things like that. If we were to provide and think of those things as additional resources for our police department or for our first responders, I think that a lot more people would be on board with the concept of what it means when people, want criminal justice reform. As of right now, that term is extremely heated, but I believe that if we were able to sit down and have a conversation about what exactly that looks like, a lot of people would be much more on board with that in terms of providing those resources. I will say that there are things that we do need to look at. We need to look at, chokehold legislation and body cams and dash cams and things like that to make sure that we have documentation of different transgressions in different situations. But in terms of the all-encompassing, I think the most important thing would be providing additional resources so that our police officers can focus on their job and have additional folks there that can do their job well.
I definitely think we need to support our police officers in the difficult job that they do and appreciate what they do. But our appreciation should also be in the form of not asking them to do something they haven't been trained to do. So I agree a lot with Kari. on this. I think I'd add probably a few things. One of them would be the duty to intervene. We did see with the George Floyd incident that we had some officers that didn't feel like they had the cover to intervene with a senior officer. And there's been some states that have had good record with using a duty to intervene legislation statewide. And I think that officers would be all right with that. And I think that communities would be all right with that. You know, I think de-escalation training should be in every police officer's toolbox. And you know, we're dealing with one right now in Wisconsin where escalation was the problem. So I think learning how to take a situation and de-escalate it is really, really important. So that's some training we can give our police officers. I think they'd be open for it. Here in our community, we've been pretty lucky, really. Our police our police department and the communities that are most impacted by them are in discussions with each other and talking with each other about what needs to change. And I'd like to see those conversations ongoing and not just a one-off.
I absolutely agree with Judy. I think the de-escalation training is paramount. When I was in the Army, we had to go through hours and hours of training to be able to protect and to be protected. I believe we need more training and access to mental health professionals. We can't have people who are trying to do everything at once. We need well-trained law enforcement officers. We need community policing. We need mental health care and case management professionals in order to deal with a wide variety of issues that our police face today.
So I have worked as a criminal defense attorney. I had the great honor of representing a man named Sean Williams, who was wrongfully incarcerated for a crime he did not commit for over 25 years. The detective in charge of the case made the sole eyewitness, threatened her, made her testify under oath against what she had actually seen, threatening to take away her 4 children if she did not lie under oath. He hid exculpatory evidence that would have shown that my client was innocent and actually in a hospital 2 states away the night the alleged crime took place. And this detective did this to nearly 100 innocent people, the majority of them Black men. The reason that we cannot go after this detective is because of qualified immunity. We have to end qualified immunity for police officers. There is no reason that if you are breaking the law, that you should not be held accountable for your actions. I am an Army wife. As Justin was talking about, when you are in the military, you receive exceptional training. If a military officer or an enlisted men were to just murder someone, they would be investigated, they would be court-martialed, and they would be held accountable under the UCMJ. That is not something that happens to civilian police officers. We need to end chokeholds. We need to ban no-knock warrants. We need to hold Breonna Taylor's murderers accountable. We need to make sure that lynching is a federal crime in the United States of America. And, you know, a lot of people are going to say that these things are not possible, especially in a place like Missouri that's seen as, you know, overtly rural. Well, we not only had marches here in Columbia, there were marches in Mexico, in Moberly, in Warrensburg, in Windsor, in Belton, in Raymore, in Nevada, in Camdenton, in Waynesville, people all in Lebanon, people all over this state. I'm just listing the towns in my districts because extra props to you guys. But all over the state, in big communities and small, people were standing up for justice because that's what we should be doing here. And when you have one bad cop, it makes them all look bad. It tarnishes everyone, and we shouldn't want that. Law enforcement officers put their lives on the line every single day. And we want them doing, as Kari was talking about, what they are trained to do. Often they are asked to do things in which they are not trained to do. And so we need additional resources for mental health professionals. We need additional resources for drug professionals. we should be investing, we should be changing the court system to some degree. We should be having more drug courts. We need to get rid of mandatory minimums because they are racist. We have a complete system overhaul that needs to happen in order for real justice to actually exist in this country.
It's a long list.
All right, thank you all for your comments. Switching gears a little bit back onto the issue of climate change. So this is another question coming in from YouTube for any of the candidates. What is your opinion on the bill passed in the State House and Senate prohibiting Missouri cities from passing bans on plastic bags and other disposable food containers?
If my memory is correct, that bill passed through the State House and Senate after the city of Columbia tried to implement a ban on plastic bags. I might be wrong on that, but in either case, I support the right of local municipalities to have local level policies, lowest level first, to protect their land, their environment, and I hope to see a state legislature that protects and local control and uplifts local government.
We'll be there for you, Justin.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, we will. Taking away local control has actually been a big issue in the Missouri state government for many, many different things. I think Judy and I probably both agree that the state should not be interfering with things like a plastic bag ban for local areas. But the state has also stepped in on a number of different things. One of the biggest ones was when St. Louis tried to pass a higher minimum wage than the state minimum wage. They, came in and retroactively said, nope, sorry, you can't do that. State minimum wage is universal minimum wage in Missouri, and St. Louis cannot increase minimum wage for, that single local area. And that's completely insane to me. We need, as a state legislator, you need to realize what things should be handled by the local government, which is a lot, what things could be handled by the state, and what things have to be going up to the federal level. And we need people in office that are going to actually do that.
I'll just say one thing. It's a huge distraction when we have so many more big issues to solve. It blows my mind that they'll even spend their time on that. Sorry.
So another question we have coming in, not from YouTube, but from our Facebook stream. Another open-ended question for any of the candidates. What will they do to protect the will of the voters when it comes to Medicaid expansion and how that affects younger voters and younger people in general?
I'll jump in first since it's a Medicaid question. I've been fighting for Medicaid expansion since 2005. And I do know that we're going to need to protect it. In my district, Senate District 19, we voted for Medicaid expansion at 63%. But I really believe that once it gets there, there's so many intricate details in implementation that a lot can be done to gut it. Medicaid is for students in particular. There are a whole lot of students that use Medicaid as their health insurance while they're in school. And it is a really nice gap insurance safety net that we have to protect. I'm really glad it passed. I'm thrilled, I can't tell you. It seemed like a personal victory for me that night. So I think we just really work hard. We roll up our sleeves. We're going to have different legislators there to do that than the ones we have. Sometimes you have to change the politician out to get what you want and to protect what you want.
I would just say from the federal level, the best way to protect Medicaid expansion is to protect the Affordable Care Act. A lot of people don't recognize that Medicaid expansion is a provision within the Affordable Care Act. And to that end, being the millennial that I am, I'll just tell you that I did not have health insurance before the Affordable Care Act was passed. And then it was passed, and it now lets anyone 26 and under stay on their parents' health care plan. And that was how I was able to have health care. I'm sure that many people watching who are a little bit younger than I am no longer under 26. But for those of you who are, protecting the Affordable Care Act is really important, because the way our healthcare system is set up right now, health insurance providers operate at a profit. They're not interested in making sure you get the best medicine. They're making sure they have the best deal. And so it's really important that we protect the Affordable Care Act, not just for preserving Medicaid expansion, but for making sure that young people have access to healthcare, and that people with pre-existing conditions have access to healthcare as well.
Exactly.
So on
Kari,
the county, no.
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay. I just want to say on the county level, we're not part of that funding. I'm very happy that Medicaid passed. And I hope elected officials on the state and national level both protect and fund it. And I think that all the elected officials here know the will of the people is the supreme law of the land. And I hope to do everything I can with that as well.
Both be.
Yeah, obviously, like everyone else here, I'm very happy that it did wind up passing. But it is a real possibility that if we do not do something about the people in office, that it will not be implemented the way that people are hoping that it will. It's obvious from Twitter feeds from our elected officials that they are already trying to figure out ways to manipulate the budget so that they don't really have to fund it, and then it'll just kind of go away. And well, if we don't put money behind this, then, yada, yada. But I know that my opponent was incredibly opposed to Medicaid expansion. I don't really understand how you can be pro-life and not be in favor of giving more people access to healthcare. But here we are. And I know that she will be one of those people that is on the forefront of trying to stop Medicaid from, expanding in the state, giving that access to almost, 300,000 Missourians. And it's a serious problem. And it's a problem that we have faced in Missouri for the last several years. We essentially have passed a number of different ballot initiatives in the state, whether that be legalizing medical marijuana, to raising the minimum wage, saying no to right to work. So there's a number of things that we've passed by majority rule in the state. And my opinion is that whether or not they are your positions as a representative, if the majority of people say that's what they want, it is your responsibility to put those things into law in a way that's going to benefit those people. It should not be, I'm the boss, it's my choice. No, the people are the boss. They're the ones that are in charge of your job. So I've said this to several people before, even if there was a ballot initiative that passed in Missouri that I was not a fan of, if in office, I would make it, my duty to see that gets put into law in a way that is reflective of what the people voted for. And that's what the number one thing we need to ask of our representatives.
Another question coming in from YouTube. SCOTUS rules that gender presentation or sexual orientation can't be grounds for termination at work. Does this change anything for MONA? Mona.
No, I mean, yes. We still have to pass MONA, so it's kind of a no and yes question. We still have to pass MONA. And it's been, I think this will be the 23rd year that it's gone through the Missouri legislature, the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act. I hope we'll pass under our watch when we get there, because even though the Supreme Court's dealt with the employer to employee situation, it didn't cover housing and numerous other things that that are covered in the Mona piece of legislation. So we still need it.
And I will say, even in Missouri, you can't be terminated for your sexual orientation or gender identity, but we are still an at-will employment state. So that essentially means you can be terminated for any number of reasons. It doesn't, even though they say, okay, you cannot use your sexual orientation as a reason, you can be fired for something completely irrelevant. And their real reason can be, we don't want you working here because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. But the reason they give is, any other reason that they can, because we are an at-will work state. So we need to get rid of that law. We need to join the many other states that have left at-will employment behind, and actually force employers that are going to fire people to actually give them a real reason why they should be fired, and not just, hey, this didn't work out, see you later. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of that. I agree with Judy. We sorely need to pass Mona. I would be, right there co-signing that bill if I get into office. So I'm really hoping that we're able to be there next year and see that finally passed.
I would just add, as just kind of a legal perspective on it, statutes passed by legislators often are stronger than court decisions. And what can happen is that even though the Supreme Court says you're not allowed to fire someone based on this discriminatory practice, the only way for that to be enforced, right, is to actually go to court and say that your employer is violating the law. So if you don't have the money to hire a lawyer, if you don't have the money to take off work, if you don't have the money to lose your job in the process, then you're only as protected as the state itself is willing to enforce the law. And here in Missouri, we know that the state is not really willing to enforce that law. That's why it's so important that you actually have these things written in statute. Hashtag we need to pass the ERA. But like these and the Equality Act at the federal level, these are things that are important to be written down, because just as easily as one Supreme Court can decide something, the Supreme Court can change its mind next session, and then people's lives are shaken. And so it's really important that we have these statutes passed at the state and at the federal level.
And obviously, Mona is not on the county level, of course. However, we do want to fight for those rights and be a voice for the LGBTQ community.
I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. This one is coming from Facebook again. So my family has a family farm that we have had for a couple of generations. I am worried that we will have a CAFO move close and ruin the land my people homesteaded. What will you do to protect Missouri land for future generations?
So we've talked about it a little bit already. Local control, preserving local control, returning, actually, it's not preserving, we're going to have to return local control back to counties and health departments and so on, for starters. Eminent domain's another big one we haven't even talked about. How big corporations come in and take swaths of the land that don't belong to them or shouldn't belong to them. And then there's the question of foreign ownership of land. Some of these CAFOs now and in the future are going to be owned because Missouri has created such lax laws on foreign ownership. They're going to be owned by foreign companies. I know my colleagues here on this phone are all going to be very strident in working to make sure that we preserve land for Missouri farmers in the hands of Missourians. So I know I will. I really can't believe how much land we've already allowed to have foreign ownership. It's one thing to own a building or real estate. It's another to own the land. The land should be, Missouri land should be owned by Missourians.
I want to say I am completely against CAFOs. I don't know who submitted this question, but if you are in Boone County, my email is info@justinaldred.com, JUSTINALDRED. I'd like you to reach out to me because I think that's incredibly important and I'd like to pursue this a little more.
Great. If nobody has anything else to add, I'd like to start some closing statements from each candidate. So why don't we start with Lindsey Simmons, if you want to give some closing statements.
Sure. First of all, thank you for dealing with this guy tonight. He has not really been great. I think he just swallowed a piece of gum. So we'll investigate that later. In closing, I have three pieces that I think are really important. The first is that the very first presidential election that I was able to vote in was in 2008, when it was President Barack Obama versus Senator John McCain. Two honorable men. And I was told at that time that that election was the most important election of my lifetime, and that it was so important for young people to get out and vote. And it was incredibly important for young people to get out and vote. 2020 is so much more important than what 2008 was. In 2008, there wasn't this sense that if we chose wrong, we might lose our country. 2008 was a choice to choose hope, and that's ultimately why I believe that Barack Obama won that election. In 2020, we are choosing to preserve our democracy. That is really what this vote is about. And it is crucial that young people get out and vote en masse. You need to go tell your friends. You need to talk to your siblings. You need to even go talk to your parents, your grandparents. You need to go out and encourage every single person you know to get registered to vote, and to then make sure that you actually cast a vote. If young people, millennials and Gen Z, if we all vote, we can change this country for the better. If we get out and vote, and we get out and actually do the work on November 3rd, or before then, if you're voting absentee or by mail, if we get out and we do that, then we have an opportunity to achieve all of the goals that we talked about tonight, to make education affordable, to make education accessible, to make sure healthcare is affordable and accessible as well, to make sure there are jobs in our communities, and to make sure that we are taking care of this environment. We have a real opportunity here to take a giant leap forward, but that is not going to be possible if you do not go vote. So I really hope that you will do that. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to this evening. If you have additional questions for, I'm sure, any of the candidates, they would welcome them. And I really, really, again, thank you. Get registered, go vote, make your friends do the same. Three most important things that you can do.
Thank you so much. Write down the list again. Judy Baker, any closing statements?
Yes, I would just probably ditto everything Lindsey just said, and reiterate that the youth vote is the most, it's just a crucial vote this in 2020. We have to inspire them, I know, but I think that the state of the country and many of the issues we've talked about tonight are the inspiration. I believe that the youth are going to take the baton on environment and do the things that they need to do. I know my children are, and I suspect that the 20 to 30-year-olds are going to show up in mass on November the 3rd here in our districts. We need you. We need you to come. We need you to register. We need you to get out there. We need you to bring your friends and your family. It's incredibly, what did someone say? Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. And we talked a lot about the reason, the issues that make that true tonight.
Thank you. Kari, any closing statements?
Sure. First of all, again, I just want to thank everybody who tuned in to our live stream. I really appreciate all the questions that came in for all of us. And I too will just say voting this year is the single most important thing that you could do. Right now, we are so past talking about policy, Republican versus Democrat nowadays. It is truly going to be a fight for our democracy and we value the things that our nation was founded on. In my opinion, one side does and one side doesn't. And so we really need to take a hard look at what we want our country to become in terms of the, basic things that we hold dear to us. And that's at the federal and the state level. The state has been a Republican supermajority for almost 20 years now, which essentially means that they don't have to give a Democrat one single second of time to debate any sort of bill that comes through. They can just pass whatever they want. And personally, I think that is the absolute worst form of government we could have, is to not be able to even have debate, because balance and debate and bringing multiple perspectives to different situations is vitally important. And we do not have that anymore at the federal or local level. And so get out there, make your voice heard, pick a candidate, rally behind them, get your friends inspired, get them registered to vote, and get out there on November 3rd, or, get online and get your absentee or mail-in ballot and get it in as soon as possible. Because with all the issues with the USPS right now, the sooner you can vote, the better.
And finally, Justin, any closing statements you'd like to give?
Just again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I think that we've already hit that voting is the most important thing right now. Before COVID-19, we had some problems here down in Boone County. And after COVID-19, we're going to have to deal with them, plus all the issues that came in with disease in a very, very short amount of time. With that said, in Boone County, we need commissioners that are fighters, that have a vision for the future, that are up to the fight for climate change, fight for access to affordable health care, and for good education. And that's what I'd like to do. I hope to get your support in November. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody who tuned in and asked a question. Thank you so much for your time. And I'd especially like to thank today's candidates for taking time out of their very busy schedules to be with us and to answer some questions. So thank you guys so much. If anybody watching is interested in donating to any of these campaigns or simply learning more, all the links for each candidate's donation pages and websites will be linked in the description for this video. So with that, thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful night, and make sure to get out and vote.
Thank you.
And volunteer.